welcome to
Bean Stuff.
Today we are talking, well, we haven't really decided on a full name or title for the episode yet. By the time you're listening to it, we will have. But it's Coffee Botany or something to do with that.
The plant, the seed, the farm, yeah.
The growth, the botany.
Green.
But we were going over a little bit of the plant. Actually, if you're watching the episode, you might see we have a coffee plant on the table in front of us. But we were talking a little bit about coffee, and we realized just how much of the plant is unbeknown to the coffee consumer.
It's not the first thing you think of. It's something you later on you go, my cup of coffee, how could it be better? Who works so hard to get this coffee? And we may not even think who works so hard. I mean, who works to get this coffee? And then you realize the people getting this cup of coffee to me work very hard.
It's exceptionally hard. There's so many things going on. There's so much time involved as well.
Time's a big one.
Because there's I think you had said, well, it's in our notes too, so. But there's 2.25 million cups of coffee consumed every day. Mm-hmm. And that's like, you think about that, that's incredible. That's an incredible amount of coffee.
It's a lot, and that's the consumers we are consuming the coffee. It's not the producers.
Right, that's just people drinking. That's a lot of ground up coffee getting thrown away every day.
And I wonder, and I don't myself very much think about when I'm sipping on that flat white or whatever coffee it is, what's in my mind? Probably something about to do with the day, how nice this is, whatever. But
the stresses or the relaxers of the day.
Plant doesn't come up very often in terms of, oh man, someone worked very hard to get this for me.
Right. And I mean, you don't. Yeah, I mean, like it's so different when you're eating like fruit or something like that, because you think of fruit and you think of the fruit that grow on the tree, or more commonly. But coffee is so concealed within our cup or within a liquid, we don't actually often see the green fruit that it comes.
Yeah, it's right, which
red
is
fruit. And
that green fruit that conceals. That's not the coffee seed. That even conceals the seed within it. It's like you don't get to see this stuff.
No, we don't. We often get that wrong. We don't pay much respect back to the origin.
Or we get a packet of ground coffee. We don't even see the seed within the coffee cherry. So it's like, what are we talking about?
Yeah, well, and coffee is a primary export for a lot of countries. Mm-hmm. Latin America, Africa, Asia. And how many jobs in those coffee producing countries?
I've looked, there's different stats out there, but you were talking around somewhere 25 million people. That's their income.
Wow.
Is growing the trees so that we can sip our cup of coffee.
But then on a global scale, coffee actually provides jobs for more than just coffee producing countries. Mm-hmm. What was it, 500 million jobs?
That's what they say, and that's involving people utilizing coffee indirectly or directly, right from the plant itself or later on in the process or in another country. 500 million, that is their income. That's a lot of people to be involved.
That's a lot of people moving coffee and roasting it. And
we used to, at our roastery, sometimes we would think just at the roaster when it gets there, how many hands does it pass through before we actually put it in a packet? And I can't remember. We were talking about 30 plus hands by the time you take the bags off the truck, you take them in, and then you count the beans, you count the bags, and then you take the bags and put them onto a pallet, and it goes on, and you realize the roasters then take the beans and then the packers. It's a lot of hands involved just at the roastery.
Did you count everybody as two hands or one hand?
Oh, wow, we may need to count again.
Do a recount, or just times it by two.
There you go. At least someone hasn't got a hand or two hands.
But yeah, I mean, just kind of starting from the very beginning, coffee comes from a tree, and I know we've talked somewhat about this in the past, and hopefully this episode, or we might have to bleed over into multiple, but we'll go into a little bit more in depth of just the actual process of what's on the tree, how does coffee grow, and where, and that kind of thing.
It's really interesting, the whole coffee tree, or some of the writing, some call it a tropical evergreen shrub.
It makes me think of Monty Python.
Okay.
A shrubbery.
Oh, mate, I'm not dead yet.
Yes. But it is an evergreen tropical shrub. That just does not sound like coffee at all, does it?
Well, if you look at that right in front of us, what's that look like?
Wow, looks like an evergreen shrub.
A tropical evergreen shrub.
And how high can it, or how large can it? I mean, obviously, what's in front of us is fairly small.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
how large can one of these grow?
Oh, a coffee tree, they get big. I mean, we're talking 100 feet.
Wow.
Which, if you were someone coming to a coffee farm, they do it seasonally usually, and go to one coffee farm, then they go to another coffee farm to pick the cherries off that plant, you don't want your workers 100 feet up in the air.
No, that's quite a way up in the air.
And no, so it grows that high, and actually funny that they will use 100-foot coffee tree to shade the coffee trees below. I mean, there's forests out there that are not just coffee trees though.
Right.
But the coffee tree usually, I don't know, you're talking about 10, 15 feet, perhaps 30, I don't know. But enough so someone could climb up on a ladder and pick out the beans, but more than that, so that they probably don't need to use a ladder. They can just reach up and pick off the beans without having to safety problems or just can't reach them.
I think of like a hazelnut orchard. Has kind of that height to it almost.
Yeah.
An achievable height. So yeah, you don't want people 100 feet in the air.
No. Otherwise, if you get too high, either you're going to get beans, good coffee cherries that are not going to be picked because you just can't reach them.
Right.
The birds will get them, whatever. So you got to think about the height of what that tree, and they will prune to keep them at a good height that's manageable for the farm, for them to produce them and harvest them as such.
And one of the things that we were looking at in our notes here, and you had a photo that was kind of interesting, and I might be jumping a little bit, but
that's right.
The different types of coffee plants, what they actually look like, can be different.
That's
from
right.
Variety to variety, but just what they look like specifically is, if you're looking on the podcast or watching it, sorry, there's going to be a little coffee tree on our table here, but they're a very green plant.
Yeah.
Evergreen shrub, I guess.
It's funny. You look at this one and you can describe that tree, and that is a coffee tree, shrub, whatever you want to call it. And it's going to grow 100 feet if we allowed it to do that.
Maybe not in that pot that we have.
No, I doubt I'd be alive at that point. But it's interesting. Different trees, different coffee trees are going to look quite different. You can get a lot of variety out there. We'll look at that shortly about what that means to us when we taste our cup of coffee, because the type of tree they grow, where they grow it, how high they grow it, what the soil is, how long they grow it. When do they pick just the red ones, or do they pick the green cherries off the tree? It makes a huge difference to the cup of coffee that we actually end up drinking here.
Yeah, and the one that we have here has a kind of I would almost call it a waxy leaf. It looks shiny, kind of. Is that common to most coffee trees you find?
I'm not a botanist, so I don't know all my coffee trees that well. But I mean, the ones I've seen have always had that waxy look to them. The leaves, how they grow, is different for different trees. Some grow like this one, that's all sort of together in bunches. Some grow more separately up a different branch, and separately. Some branch off from that and grow. So there's different ways a coffee tree grows. As I say, I'm not a botanist. I don't quite understand all the intricacies of that, but I do know there's different trees that grow differently, that therefore taste differently in the cup.
And how many varieties of coffee are there?
If you go through the family tree of, starting it from plant, it's not an animal, it's plant. If you remember your biology, you realize that's where you start. There's the animal kingdom, there's the plant kingdom, and off you go down that one. And it's incredible to go through right down to where you get down to a species. And now you can find coffee in there, the coffea, and that's a species of coffee tree. Before that, you've got a genus, Coffea, and you go down into the species, which you're going to get to Arabica and Robusta. That's probably the most common ones. There's Liberia. There's 120 different species.
Wow.
And probably we know one or two.
Wow. I mean, that's pretty amazing how many. I mean, I just think of the variety we have, just the, like you said, the one or two that we may know. We have so much variety within that, let alone there's, other.
There's variety in it, and like the species of Arabica, which is what we particularly use in the specialty coffee industry. It's got some. We'll look at that perhaps another podcast. It's the benefits are incredible, but it does have some disadvantages of it can't just grow everywhere. But it tastes way better than a Robusta, for instance. But I like to look on the pack you buy at the shop, at the roastery, or you buy the green beans. You probably get some more information before you roast it at home yourself, and you can start finding out some information of the country where it was grown originally. Is it Arabica or Robusta? That's a really good question to ask, because there's a lot of manufacturers or producers in the consumer countries that will label it as Arabica with a little bit of Robusta in it just to beef it up, because Robusta is a lot cheaper. But you're going to change the taste of that coffee. Some would say it's 100% Arabica. Then you need to look into the rules. What's 100% mean? Does it mean there's no Robusta in here? So there's different things that go on there. But I find looking at the packet of coffee, you can find out, there's the species. It's gone further. It's talked about a variety. It's a couture. It's a bourbon. It's a typica. Don't worry about those words, but they are varieties of coffee. And then you'll find that they may go to a sub varietal of it's been crossed. This typica's been crossed with a bourbon, and now you got a different coffee. And so
wow,
you suddenly start realizing this is huge.
Well, there's just so much you can mix and match, and so many different combinations you can create.
There's a limit to it, to the Arabica. It's pretty much similar around the world, and they've tried to make crossbreeds and do things with it because of things like disease, coffee borer, rust on the leaves. It looks just like rust. If that happens to a farmer on his tree, as it's happened recently in Guatemala and some places that ruins your crop, and suddenly you don't have income for that year, and what do you do?
Wow.
You can't just you've got nothing else to lean back on as a farmer, and you've got to look at what I need to get a different pineapple. I need to grow apples. What do I need to do to survive? Because my coffee is dying.
Wow. Well, I don't know how to segue from that.
Sorry,
but,
yes. I didn't mean to be too serious.
Yeah, that's okay. Well, I guess, so one thing to look at is, what is actually in our drink? What is it actually made up of, from the plant there? I guess the short answer is it's a plant.
That's right. Good answer. You've been listening.
It's almost like, when you juice things, and it's completely different, I guess, but that idea of we are using a plant to create a drink, it's like juicing a carrot or something like that. I mean, yeah, it's complete. When I say it's like that, it is completely different to juicing a carrot, but we are still consuming a plant byproduct or, something of that nature.
That's right.
Yeah. So the trees are typically grown in a tropical climate.
Correct. And you can grow trees outside the tropics,
For instance, the one we have on the table here.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. Good point. And
even in New Zealand, you had a couple as well.
I did.
On the back porch.
Yeah, it wasn't my problem, not being that much of a farmer, with the couple I had on back porch, like this one here, is it wasn't insect disease, it wasn't rust, it wasn't suddenly flooding, it wasn't poor soil that was my problem with growing it. It was another thing called, you may have heard this word, it's called a toddler.
Oh.
Not you. But I remember having friends round, and that was fine, and they had toddlers, and we were doing things as adults, and when they left, I realized, where are my coffee plants?
They had been pulled up.
They'd been all pulled up. Anyway.
That and frost.
Yeah. I found, and we're getting on another topic here, that frost is a huge barrier to coffee, and you're not getting that in the tropics. When I talk about the tropics, and talk about between Tropic of Cancer and Capricorn there.
Right.
And if you get it in between those,
you're in a good place.
You're in a good place, and you start losing some of those variables that are going to ruin a coffee tree.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is rainfall.
Yeah.
You need a lot of it.
You do. And at a certain time of the year.
You need it to be at the right time.
Yep.
I mean, do you think of a place like where we are in Oregon, we get a lot of rain.
Yes.
But we're not at a tropical climate.
No, and the length of time it rains in Oregon and the cold and the frost makes it very hard to grow a plant. You would need to bring it inside to grow a plant like this.
Are there places that greenhouse coffee outside of the tropics that we, I mean, that's one thing I always wondered, like, are there countries greenhousing coffee that don't?
There could be. I mean, they grow it in America, down California. They grow it. I'm not sure. I don't think they put it into greenhouses. The problem you're going to have there is room and space to store in a greenhouse. The amount of coffee trees we were talking about before,
right?
You won't have enough space to do that. You need just sheds and sheds and sheds of warehouses of coffee, buildings, I should say, to grow your coffee in. And that gets really expensive because you've got another thing called humidity.
Right.
You've got to keep it in a certain humidity, and those sheds, who's going to pay to keep the heaters on at night?
Right. Well, and when we say temperature, what temperature is kind of an average that we're looking for?
Average, I would think, and again, I'm not a botanist, but what I read, what I hear from farmers is 21 Celsius, that's 70 Fahrenheit about.
Sounds like a good climate.
It does sound like a nice warm climate, and that's why people live in the tropics, because you do get heavy downpours, but you get a lot of nice warm temperature, and the coffee tree loves it.
And when we talk about tropics and then between tropics, Capricorn and Cancer, and then temperature, what's also the altitude that those need to be sitting at?
Altitude, yeah. They can range from sea level right up to almost like 2,000 meters or 6,500 feet. So
that does give a lot of range to the countries in those areas. It can grow in a lot of different places within those countries.
It can. Of course, you got another thing when you talk about altitude. As you go higher, you tend to get a better tasting coffee. There's a whole things go with that of the plant having to work really hard to get the nutrients. It takes longer at a higher altitude. There's not as much oxygen.
Right.
But because the plant has worked so hard, it produces these wonderful flavors.
Yeah.
So you get some high grown Guatemalan coffees. They call them like strictly hard bean coffees. It's hard because it's taken a lot to grow. Whereas the Robusta, we may talk about it, we will talk about another session, grows sea level, a whole lot of it.
Right.
But hasn't grown, it's not hard for it to do, but unfortunately it doesn't taste very good.
Interesting.
When you take it to the cup.
Interesting. Yeah, so it can vary flavor-wise via temperature, location, altitude, nutrients in the soil, all those different parts of that.
Yeah, I mean, those nutrients in the soil, that's a huge one just in itself of where you plant it. You can't just plant it you can't plant it at the beach, for instance.
Right.
It needs to, a forest is a good place, but then you need to cut some stuff out so you can actually grow your trees and keep the other shade trees there, so you keep your birds going there, because they're important as they drop things.
Poop, you mean?
Yeah, I didn't want to say that. But that fertilizes for the plants below. There's a whole ecosystem going on there, so you got to be very careful when you start taking away trees to grow other trees.
And what's crazy is it takes 5 years. So you plant a cup of coffee, or you don't plant a cup of coffee.
That'd be great, wouldn't it? You pour the coffee onto the ground.
Yeah.
Woo, there's a tree.
Yeah. But you plant a coffee bean or coffee seed.
Yes.
It takes 5 years for that to grow to the point where it's even producing coffee that I can use.
Approximately, but 5 years. Yeah, be right.
And then it's only got 15 years of of producing coffee that's usable.
That's right. You could. It could be longer. We probably should just pause there for a moment, because you plant the seed into the ground, and if all things go well. If you don't have toddlers around, if you don't have borer bugs, if you don't have
disease,
all those things, if there's not a typhoon that comes in, whatever it may be, it takes 5 years. What does the farmer do during those 5 years? You hope he has other trees that are older that he can produce and get money from, but if he's got a small little plot, that's hard to do.
It's hard to turn your crop while you... Yeah, it's hard to get new growth to replace your old crop.
And because it is a plant, as you say, it has a productive life of 15 years, and you could go. It could last a lot, 75 years, but the seed's not going to taste as good after 15 years. And then that's a generalization again, but the farmer he's got a lot of time to have to to produce a good crop that he gets income from. And he may not have enough room to even have little seedlings, they call them soldiers, that he can have those ready to take over from when his 15-year-old ones are time to retire and become shade trees.
Amazing how much work it takes just to get ready for the next crop. Make sure your soil's at the right temperature. Make sure your soil's got the right nutrients. Make sure one of the things that we were talking about was shade. You know, you can't just, I mean, you can plant coffee in a big open place, but it needs shade. What were you saying? The first year, if you plant it in a big open sunny field, the first year will be okay. Well, the first producible year, so after 5 years, it might be okay, but you're going to start to not get as good a coffee from that if it doesn't have enough shade. Was that what you were saying?
Yeah, not quite.
Not quite. Oh man,
sorry. It was a good try there. But we were talking about pollination. That a coffee tree, it's self-pollinating. The Arabica is anyway.
That's right. That's right.
And because it's self-pollinating, it can just do its own thing. It can do it alone.
Right.
But if they've found that if you have other trees around that attract birds and insects, and particularly the bee, it is then can help pollinate the coffee tree. And they talk about 50% more yield on that tree because of pollination from insects that happens.
Wow.
And it just means there's more stuff going on, so more gets pollinated, so you get a bigger yield. And I better say, in case someone comes back and says, "Whoa, Justin, what about Brazil?" which doesn't have a lot of shade-growing coffee. It's all in, you look at pictures of Brazilian coffee trees and it's all in beautiful rows. I've been there myself. And there's no shade trees going on. There may be a few, but typically it's just out there in the open. Guess what? Brazil's right in the middle of the tropics, and it's a climate that works beautifully for coffee. So if there's rain, that's fine, but by the time the rain stops, it's the right time for harvesting. It's just a good climate for coffee, which is why probably Brazil is one of the top producers in the world of our coffee.
Everything just lines up really well.
It's a great place to grow coffee.
Yeah, and you were saying even just the smell when you were in Ethiopia. You mentioned that you can even just smell coffee trees.
You can. It's an experience that I thought I would never have, but there I was going down a dusty road, and you had to have the windows down because it got so hot.
Right.
But then you had to have them up so you didn't get so much dust in the 4-wheel drive thing we were using.
Yeah.
But when you had them down, which is most of the time, there was just a constant smell when you went through a place like Yirgacheffe, and you would smell stuff and you say, "What is that smell? I recognize that." It was sort of like a jasmine smell to me. And that was just coffee tree after coffee tree just growing wild on the side of the road, let alone the plantation, whatever, the farm we were going to go to.
Right.
Where they actually line up in lines, or you get the guy who just has a room-sized plot, and that's his, and he's going to put that with his neighbor, who's going to put it with their neighbor and their neighbor, and then they may get a tree worth of coffee. No, that was more than that, but
lots of coffie trees.
But the smell is just amazing. It's just natural in places like Ethiopia. Brazil was similar. I don't remember the smell as much as I did in Yirgacheffe in Ethiopia, but you could think they're just ripe berries. You could think they're just grapes. No, those are the coffee cherries that they are going to go through this incredible process to get them off that tree at just the right time. You can't just pick them.
Right.
We're going to talk about that, but it's just natural there, and that's why they are the producing countries, because you can't grow it like that in America, in New Zealand. They do a little bit in like North Australia, but it's getting up again and within those tropics again. Papua New Guinea up there.
Yeah. And just to kind of briefly touch on I think we'll finish on the tree, but one of the things that was amazing to me is how much coffee, a coffee tree on a coffee farm doesn't produce, or does produce, I guess. It's like you think of like a coffee tree and you think of how much coffee is in your cup, or, different things like that. And I get this really, I used to have a very skewed perception of how much coffee actually came out of a tree, but it's surprisingly almost not like,
I know, it blows your mind.
It's what it is. It's around 4,000 beans or a pound of coffee.
Yes, half a kilo of coffee that's picked. The beans, those 4,000 beans weigh a pound.
Which is crazy. You go to the store, and most coffee comes in, a pound bag or something like that.
Yeah.
And if you think of it that way, you think about how many trees that is. That's a tree, it's a little bit different because that's roasted. It's not green beans. So the weight's going to be different. Yeah. But you think about how many trees that is just sitting on the shelves of that one store.
You think one tree, and this is generalized, but one tree produces 1 to 1.5 pounds of roasted coffee. So one bag of coffee is one tree. How many trees do you need to have all those bags you see at the supermarket or at your roaster? How many trees are needed to produce that amount of coffee? And we are consuming, what did I say at the beginning?
2.5 million cups of it a day.
Yeah, it's growing. I think it was 2.25, but from the beginning, but
oh, no, I think you're right, 2.25.
It probably has gone up to that.
Just during this episode, our coffee consumption's gone up 250,000.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy how much goes into just a single cup, just from that tree, just from growing, just from the farmer cultivating that tree over the course of years and years and years, 5 years to get to the point where he can take it and then, process those beans, then ship those beans to us so that we can then roast them, that we can then grind them, then we can use them through whatever method. It's like there's so many steps we go through just to get a single cup of coffee. Then it's like wine. You think of wine, there's a plethora of wine we can buy at the store, pour in a cup and drink it, but you don't think that like the cup that I'm drinking took years to make.
Yeah, the advantage for wine, of course, is they grow the coffee, the vines grow. It's all in the same country.
True.
It's all done. There's nothing. There's no
depending on where you bought the wine.
True, that's true. But where you do the whole thing, whereas coffee is much more segmented,
right?
In terms it grows, then that grower has to take it to a dry mill, then that dry mill, or to wet mill, and then that wet mill has to take it to a dry mill, and then that dry mill has to take it to the port, and then that port has to send it over to. It goes on. Whereas wine has a little bit more advantage that you can do it all a lot more at one place,
right?
And then you can sell it on the same place
if you want to.
If you want to.
Exactly. And I think coffee, there's a lot more transport. There's a lot of, you even think of like Swiss water process has to go to specific places to be processed or, depending on how you do it, there's just so many moving parts in different people.
Recently, I don't know, a year ago, they had a port strike. So the shipping, they were all on strike for whatever reasons, or good, bad, whatever. But that meant there was ships circling around, or just anchored outside the harbour, waiting to take the coffee beans that are sitting in containers in their ships to get to the port so they can unload it.
Wow.
Lots of hands there. But that just ruins the whole chain suddenly of getting coffee from the tree to our cup.
Yeah.
The port can just blow it.
It disrupts that chain. So, it's like it seems like there's so much fragility in that chain. You think of like the farmer, just the sustainability of him
it's incredible.
Having an income that's, a fair income for what he's doing. Like, without that farmer, we don't have Starbucks. We don't have any roasters. And then yet, oftentimes we're making so much money off of those things compared to what the farmer is. So there's just so much fragility. And then we go back to kind of, the root of what we're trying to talk about today, which is just the botany of just the plant.
Just the plant. And just to grow a plant is an incredible thing to do. It takes a lifetime of knowledge, really, of experience to know what works and what doesn't work. And you do all that work, and if you get it right, and I say if you get it right, and you get it on as far as onto the ship to send off to Europe, to New Zealand, to the States, wherever you're going, sending that. And if it gets stuck outside the port, and your moisture content of the bean or the hull in the where it's been stored in the ship, something goes wrong, it's there too long, and then us, the roaster, get and say, we always do a sample of what we get compared to what we were sent months ago, and if it's not the same, we can say no. We need a different sample. You need to get a different lot. This one's not going to work. This doesn't taste good. It doesn't happen that often, fortunately, but
there's that chance, that possibility that what you produce may not be any good.
That strike has caused a problem to our farmers.
Yeah, well, I think that's kind of where we're gonna stop today. And I know we've only kind of briefly touched on so many things. There's still so much to go into, so we will save that for another time. But hopefully we've kind of given a little bit of an idea of what that kind of looks like. I know it's been a little maybe haphazard, but...
and it's really... I'm not an expert in this, but to get just the feel of what's going on here and what the farmer deals with, it'd be good. I don't know if we can, it would be nice to do a podcast in Ethiopia or Brazil or somewhere where we can talk to the farmers.
That would be nice.
And actually say, what is their literal, realistic perspective of this? I mean, I've gleaned a little bit from being to those countries, but I have my own filters that I don't see it all. I don't understand it all. And there's things going on that is like might blow our minds.
Yeah, bringing perspectives from different parts of the coffee chain. But so we are going to go more into this in other episodes, but we're happy to stop here today and hopefully give you some insight into kind of some appreciation for the cup itself.
I would say when you buy your next bag, if you're roasting it, you'll find this out too, but if you buy your next bag, take some time to turn it over usually and look on the back and see what the name of the farmer is. I like it.
See if it's there.
See if it's there for a start, and most are not probably because they just don't know that. But if there is a name there, you think, wow, here's the name of a person who's done all this work to get it here, and I'm thankful for that. But just if the farm's not there, check the varietal. I would say check its Arabica first. That's probably the first thing to look at.
Right.
And that's usually big on the front because they get quite excited that it's Arabica, but that's a pretty big general thing that you need to go a little deeper than that.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for tuning in, for watching, for joining us. We hope you have learned something. If you have any questions, any comments, feel free to notify us of that in the usual ways, our website, our Facebook, or Twitter, or MySpace. Or no, we don't have MySpace. But anything, YouTube. And thank you so much for listening. And again, we look forward to chatting with you again next week. And we're also excited to see what coffees you try, what farmers you find.
Yeah.
Thanks.